Welcome to IB Biology. This is 9.1, Transport in the Xylem of Plants. Okay, so if we take a look at a plant, it has a dichotomous life. It has to live both in the air and in the ground because it gets different things that it needs from both in the soil and up above the soil. So we call these parts of the plants the roots and the shoots. In the shoots, the important things that it gets for photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and light. But the roots, that's where the water comes from, as well as some important minerals like nitrates. We're going to be focusing today on how do we move that water from the soil all the way up the plant into the leaves and out to the atmosphere. We're going to break it up into, we're going to look at it in 3 different places: in the leaves, in the main xylem vessels that run up the stems of the plants, and then, of course, we'll spend a lot of time looking at the roots and how they can absorb that water to send it up into the xylem stream. So the drawing on the left we'll have up for a while, and this diagram is really kind of a summary of what's happening during transpiration. So it shows 3 different areas that it's blown up. We've got water uptake from the soil, and then the next is what it looks like in the xylem cells, and then all the way up into the leaves. We're going to start by focusing on what's happening in the leaves of the plant. Okay, so if we're looking over on the right, the diagram of the leaf, in the middle are the xylem cells. You can see where it's labeled xylem sap. So those are the xylem cells that are continuously all the way down to the root, and that's how the water is going to get up to the plant. Once it's there, the mesophyll cells will take a lot of that water to carry out photosynthesis. That's where photosynthesis is happening, is in the mesophyll cells. But because we have to move a whole lot of water in, a lot of that water will actually be lost through tiny holes. Plural is stomata, but this individual one is labeled as a stoma. So water is lost through that stoma. And the stoma is just the hole in the opening, but that is actually controlled by a pair of guard cells that surround it. The main forces that are acting here, as the water moves from the xylem through the mesophyll cells, there's a lot of diffusion happening and osmosis, but it's mostly because we've got cohesion happening. And the cohesion is what's each water molecule that's leaving the plant through, is going to evaporate off the leaves because there's lower water potential outside the leaves than inside the leaves. And so when the water will leave the leaf, then it's going to pull on the water molecule behind it, behind that, all the way down the transpiration stream. Okay, next we're going to take a look at the transpiration stream. That's the transpiration stream is basically the water moving from the roots all the way to the leaves, but the main stream is going through these xylem cells. And the xylem cells, these are cells that form their end-to-end, and when they're mature, they're actually non-living. And it just creates this giant straw, basically, because each cell, the cell membrane and the cell wall in between is open, so the water is able to pass all the way up through the xylem cells from the roots to the leaves. And you can see the major forces acting here are cohesion and adhesion, like we talked about way back when we did water. And the cohesion is that each water molecule is pulling on each other, and the adhesion is that they're attracted to the xylem vessel, so it doesn't slide right back down. Now, these xylem vessels are pretty special. This is a micrograph of xylem, and what makes them so special is that the pressure inside these xylem cells is really low. It's like when you suck really hard on a straw. If it's a flimsy straw, it will collapse. Well, you don't want the xylem vessels to collapse, and so the plants have added a material called lignin. So they've got this cool lignified vessels that go all the way around to support the structure of the plant. The next piece we'll look at is in the roots. So how does the water get into the roots from the soil? Well, this happens at the root hair. So you can see the root hair here on the right-hand side is where it first enters. These are just cells that are elongated. So each root hair is actually a single cell, and it's elongated for maximum surface area. And this is where the water is going to enter. Now, the way plants get water to enter is through both active and passive transport within the root hair. Okay, next I'm going to give you a drawing of a long section of a root hair. Well, actually, of a root, including this first little bit is a drawing of a root hair. And the water is going to have to pass from the root hair past an area called the epidermis, and then eventually it will actually reach the xylem where the transpiration stream is going to happen. So we're going to figure out how does the water get into the root hair and past the epidermal cell and into the xylem. So this first bit, here's our soil on the outside, right? And to get the water in, the first thing a plant actually has to do is it's going to take different important minerals that it needs, nutrients such as nitrates and potassium, and it's going to need to move those into the root hair. And it does that through protein pumps. Okay, and each mineral has its own specific protein pumps. You know, they're very specific channels. So the NO3 will go through its own gate, the potassium goes through another gate, and so on and so forth. And of course, when it does this, when it's pumping this all in, that's going to take energy in the form of ATP. Now, since each mineral has its own gate that it has to go through, the protein pump, it actually needs to have quite a bit of these around, and many plants have a mutualistic relationship with fungi, or in some cases bacteria, that bacteria might get some sugars and other things from the plant, and what they do is they end up providing a lot of these important minerals, like they might be nitrogen fixers, so they can create nitrates and make that more available to the plant to take in. So it's in high enough concentrations that they're able to pull those things out of the soil. Okay, so once it's out of the soil, then what that does, when those minerals go into the root, that creates a hypertonic environment inside the root. And that means that the outside of the root is hypotonic, and we know that water will actually move from the hypotonic to the hypertonic, or it will move from high water potential to low water potential, and that's osmosis. Once the water is in the root hair, it's going to have to travel from there across the epidermal cell into the xylem. And we're going to take a look in this next slide about how that happens, because there's a few different routes to get from the root hair all the way into the xylem. Okay, so let's take a look at a cross-section of the root. So you can see here's the cross-section and that they have blown up. And we're going to trace the water from the soil into the xylem vessels. There's two main routes that this can happen. So one is the apoplastic route, and this is when the water just travels along in between the cell walls. It's really easy for the water to travel that way, and that'll just happen, quickly through osmosis and being pulled from one place to the next. But the other one is the symplastic route, and that's one that actually travels through cytoplasm and across cell membranes. But importantly, there's this little area called the Casparian strip. And what this area is doing, the Casparian strip is showing us that no matter what route the water takes, that it will have to pass through a membrane at some point. This is so the plant can actually control what goes in and out of the main transpiration stream. So when the water goes by that apoplastic route, it will hit the Casparian strip, and then it gets transported into a cell across a membrane before it actually enters the xylem vessels. Okay, now just to sum up, here is that drawing once again. You can see that water has to travel from the roots, and it's going to go in through active transport of minerals, which allows osmosis to happen so it can pass into the root hairs. And then the water will pass from there through two routes, either apoplastic or symplastic, into the transpiration stream, where it gets pulled up through cohesion and adhesion, all those hydrogen bonds pulling it up all the way to the leaf under really the pressure. It's really, really strong pressure. Again, like you were sucking on a straw with a vacuum. And so those lignified xylem cells allow that water to come up without collapsing the xylem into the leaf, where it can be absorbed through the mesophyll cells for photosynthesis, and a lot of that water, again, gets lost through the stomata. But then when it gets lost through the stomata, it'll pull the next water molecule behind it. Well, there's quite a bit more that you'll have to be able to do with this, talking about different labs and different variables about what affects the rate of transpiration, but we'll take a look at that in class or in another video.